Hi, art teacher here with you again, and today it's watercolor. Be sure to do your subscriptions, your likes, your favorites, and leave a comment below if I'm unclear about anything. This one's going to be a little different than the crayon resist watercolor technique, which was more for younger students. Today with watercolor, I'm going to have two different little activities I want you to do. One of them will be a value scale. Hopefully you already did the value series, so you know what I mean when I say value. Value means the levels between black and white, between dark and light. In this case, the levels, we could use black, but the levels of a color between black and white, different levels of lightness and darkness. So, here I have a 5-unit scale from dark to light, and we're going to do that with watercolor. And I'm going to talk about how that works. The other one is, I'm going to take just a little picture I've drawn. In this case, it has some of those bird type thingies that I like to do. And I'm going to paint that in using watercolor. And I have a few examples here to show about that. So that's where we're heading with this one. I don't think this one's necessarily going to be a short video though. What I have is a normal little watercolor set that you can get at probably about any store, even a drugstore, and just a little brush that comes with it and a little thing of water, and also just in this case normal copier paper, and I just folded it in half. If you want to use better quality supplies, and I'm going to have a whole video about better quality supplies, but here are the names of two companies that make paper, right? And those are high quality, good papers you can get. You can look at those on the internet, Fabriano and Arches. Also, there are better quality brushes and paints and so forth. Now, let's jump right into this. I want to talk about transparent and opaque. Opaque means really dark, that you cannot see through it. Like a wall is opaque, you can't see through it. Transparent, that's like a window, you can see right through it. The word translucent would mean you can kind of see through it a little bit, like a tinted window would be translucent. Now, I guess the difference between transparent and opaque would be how much water you have in the water paint ratio. If you have a lot of water, it's going to be more transparent. The color will be lighter. If you have more paint than water, you put more paint, that would make the paint darker or the color darker and probably more opaque, thereby more opaque. So what I'm going to do is start at the bottom and make it get a little lighter with each unit. And the way I'm going to do that is get my brush, and why don't I use purple since it's a really pretty color, and I'm just swishing it around. Just swishing it around. By the way, you should be able to make one of these pretty easily. All I did is make a large rectangle and divided it up into 5 approximately equal sized rectangles, the bottom one being darkest, then each one gets a little lighter. Now, you saw right there, I swished it around for a while. I didn't push it down hard, I just swished it around gently for a while. So that's going to be pretty dark. If I wanted to lighten it, I could put it back in the water and rub it gently against the edge, okay? But I'm not going to, because I want this to be the darkest one. I'll start with the darkest one here. And I'm going to carefully stay within the box I created for myself. I'm pretty good at that. What I do is I take the tip of the bristle there right up against the pencil line I drew, so it stays pretty much exactly in the line. It's a little bit of a skill. You can get that by practicing this type of exercise a few times, and you can get that. Now, I want my next one to be a little bit lighter. So, without dripping it, I'm going to try to show you. There I have my dark one, and my next one will be a little bit lighter. So the way I'm going to do that, take my brush, which is already loaded with paint and water mixture, and I'm going to add more water. So the water paint ratio will have more water to it. So there it goes. Rub it gently against the edge. Now that paint should be quite a bit lighter, and I can do my value scale right up the scale that way. And again, the idea here being I'm trying to stay within the box I created for myself. And there it goes. Try to keep it nice and even. Now, I'm not doing anything with that brush. You're not putting it back in there just yet. I'll show this to you and you can see. It gets a little bit lighter this time, so I'm controlling it. Darker, then a little lighter. Now I'm going to the next one. I'll just take this brush, which is still loaded with paint and water, and I will adjust the water paint ratio by dipping it in the water again and rubbing it against the edge gently. Now it should be even lighter still. And I'm going to do that middle box. Again, I'm taking that tip of the brush. You be careful with that. That's how it works. You know, you got to be reasonably careful. And that's how you make your art, is you're working carefully and not rushing through it. But I'm taking the tip of that brush right up against that pencil line. And this should be a little bit lighter. So every one is getting a little bit lighter. So dark, a little bit lighter still. And you guessed it, the next one is, again, adjusting the water paint ratio once more, dipping it in the water, rubbing it against the edge. Now, just take that brush, and it's getting pretty light. At this point, it's getting pretty light, applying that same technique. And by that I mean watching carefully where the tip of those bristles go, and making sure it goes right up to that pencil line. And that way I'm able to stay within the box I've created for myself. You can see each one's getting lighter. Now the last one last dip in the water. And this one will be almost white. Again, rub it gently against the edge. Don't flick it, and you know, you don't want to be super messy for no reason. Now, I'm bringing it right up around the entire box. The way I've been doing from the beginning with this. There. So, each one gets a little bit lighter. And now you have the feel for how to make a value scale, and you'll have a better understanding of this water paint ratio. Now, that's a pretty good, important idea with watercolor, and that's a good exercise to do. I suggest you do a few of those, get the feel for it for a couple reasons. Number one, gives you the feeling for how to control your water paint ratio and how to control your darkness and opaqueness. Okay? You can control that through practice. Also, it gives you a chance to practice your technique with your brush and getting the brush to go where you want it and the water and the paint mix to go where you want it. And you do that by watching the tip of the brush going right up next to the lines you've established for yourself. Next thing, watercolor traditionally starts transparent. You start with a transparent part. That means using more water in the water paint mixture. So that isn't really the traditional way you would do watercolor, but it's an exercise. So by starting transparent, I mean, often you might take a light area and splash it all around over your drawing, okay? Being very careful to leave the white of the paper for any areas that you are going to want to be white. So you are being a little careful with it. Then go in with darker colors and more opaque colors and try to hit some negative spaces with that. Now I know I just said a lot of stuff there, so just to make it clear, let me show you an example. Now this is using that Stonehenge paper I talk a lot about. This isn't copy paper, that's a thicker, heavier paper, 100% rag type paper. What I have here is a little watercolor painting I did, and you'll see I have a white area here. I was able to make that white by just saving the white of the paper and not putting any watercolor paint on that. Then you'll notice on the birds themselves, they are lighter. They're more transparent. And then I save the really dark opaque areas for the negative shapes, the areas around the birds. So a lot of what you do with watercolor paint is painting the negative spaces, the areas around the main subjects. In this case, these birds, I paint around them a lot. And I just leave the initial first wash, or the initial first splashy part, which is very light and transparent, for the birds themselves, so that the light parts are saved. And then the dark parts are what's painted in on top of the light part. And I'll show you what I mean on my painting here. So that's one example. Let me show you a couple others. This one might even explain it better. There I have several of those funny birds with stars that I like to draw. I've left a lot of the white of the paper for the birds. And you can see I painted very darkly around the outside of them. Okay? So you need to think out ahead of time where you want it to be white, and be sure to leave that white. Then you can do light washes. A wash is where you put the paint gently on top of it, going back and forth. Okay? And I'll do a video just on washes probably. And then I painted around the outside, the negative space. And another one to give you the idea, saving the white of the paper. Here I have one of those 3D birds. Saving the white of the paper for where the light is hitting it. Having kind of a transparent, light colored orange here. And then very dark opaque colors in the negative space, or the background space, the area around it, called the negative space. Okay. Then I like to also, because I like doing it, because it's fun, I like to add little design elements like these little hatching lines and things like that. And I'll talk a lot more about hatching and cross-hatching and all that sort of fun stuff. But that's another example of it right there. And you can do this. It doesn't have to always be with watercolor. Here I have a color pencil drawing, again, where I save the white of the paper. So those are a few examples. Now, let me go ahead and make an example so you can really see what I'm talking about. I want to leave a lot of these birds white. This is kind of a light drawing. I don't know if you're seeing that the best, but it's kind of light. But I can see it pretty good as I'm painting. And once I paint on it, you'll see it better. So let me go ahead and get rolling on that. I'm going with a lot of water, and my water paint ratio is going to be more toward the water because I want it to be transparent. So more water means more transparent. That's the light stuff. Then I'm careful not to get any paint at all on the parts I want to be white. So let's go with some more of that pretty purple color. And I'm just going to go around a lot of stuff here. And I can be a little careless, except for I can't be careless about getting paint on any area that I want to be white. So there's some parts I want for sure to be white. And I'm careful to paint around those. I'm mixing a little blue in with that purple. See, blue and purple next to each other on the color wheel. So I got to use all these art ideas at once. That's the beautiful thing about art. Once you get to know all these art ideas, like analogous colors and watercolor techniques, you're using them all at once. And a lot of times you don't even really have to think about them. Like, I went straight for that blue. When I saw I was using purple, I went straight for that blue without even really thinking about it, because I know blue and purple, that's going to be a winning combination because they're analogous colors and I know my color wheel. So I'm going around and I'm splashing up a bunch of color over a lot of areas here, you know, a little bit carelessly, as long as I don't get any paint on my areas that will be white. And that's what I'm doing here. So this would be like a first stage in a painting that will look, yeah, I guess like this one, something like that. And maybe to contrast with that purple, again, naturally, without even thinking about it, to contrast with that purple, I could get a little yellow in there. Those are complementary or opposite or across the street colors. I did a whole video just on that, just on the complementary colors. So I'm going to go around the border a bit with that yellow. And even if I get some of the yellow onto the shapes, that's fine, because my negative space is going to help me define those shapes better when I do my negative space painting. So what I've done is I've just painted around kind of willy-nilly, except I did try to keep the white of the paper in the areas that I thought ahead of time. I want that to be white, so I kind of kept those white. Now, let it dry a little bit. Now, if you're really into watercolor painting, and you're using those papers like the Fabriano and the Arches, you're using that good kind of paper, you'd have a hair dryer. You know, when you have wet hair, like the girls might have wet hair in the morning, just use a hair dryer and it'll dry it up real quick. But because it's this kind of paper and paint, it should dry reasonably quick. It doesn't take forever for this to dry. So, I'm going to clean my brush a little, rub it on the edge. There it goes. Get it pretty dry. Now, I'm going to hit it with more opaque areas. And I'm going to use my water paint ratio, but with more paint this time to do that. And I'm going to hit some of what are called the negative spaces. Now, by that I mean, you can see how dark I made this area around these two tail feathers. You see how dark I made that? And that's what I'm going to do now, is use those dark opaque paints to hit those areas. So, should be reasonably dry enough to do that. And why don't I go real dark? I'm going to get this black paint, which on a low quality watercolor set like this, the black always tends toward being more on the green side. That's just how it is, you know. And you know, a lot of great artists, they don't, you know, if you take a watercolor class at a college, they'll say, no, don't use black. They'll always tell you don't use black. Go look at Manet, M-A-N-E-T, probably one of the greatest painters ever to live, M-A-N-E-T. He used black all the time, right? So, who's to say, right? Follow your own judgment on these things. Anyway, I've got a nice opaque area. Nice opaque part. Now I'm going to be careful and go around the outside of this star and this tail feather with this kind of blackish green color. It's not the prettiest color. It's all right though. It'll work for what I'm doing. But it's very opaque. That's what I needed. Very opaque. And I'm hitting some of the areas around the bird, and that's going to define the shape very nicely. And I'm hitting it. I'm not even putting more water on it. I'm just putting more paint. That'll make the water to paint ratio more opaque. And let's go ahead and hit some other areas, and you're going to really start seeing this bird pop out more because I'm painting around the outside of it. And that's one of the great secrets of good watercolor painting. You're always going to want to think about negative spaces, or the area around the outside of whatever it is you're painting. This guy Charles Reed, he's a contemporary painter. He does flowers and stuff, but also some portraits. He's good with that negative space stuff. You can look him up on the internet, and I'd say check out Winslow Homer, John Singer Sargent, and British Landscape Watercolor. Uh-oh, my art disappeared here. There, I painted on it. Huh. But type in Winslow Homer Watercolor, John Singer Sargent Watercolor. Look at any of those, and my gosh, you can't go wrong looking at the watercolor paintings of those great American artists. John Singer Sargent and Winslow Homer were just real breakthrough artists with the media of watercolor. Just looking at their work can help you have a personal breakthrough with your ability to do watercolor. You know, this Charles Reed's good, but British Landscape Watercolor painters. So you can see, although I could put much more time into it, you can start to see this bird emerging, the shape emerging out, because not because I painted the bird, but because I painted the negative space or the area around him. And that's one of the great secrets of watercolors, painting opaque, real dark opaque paint around the outside of a form, and that's what defines it. It works good with flowers too. And you see, if you look at a really good flower painting with watercolor, usually you're going to find that that's what they did. They painted the negative spaces with opaque paint. But their water paint ratio had more paint, which made it opaque. And that's how they did it. And you can go in a lot of directions with that. So, number one, get yourself a watercolor set, brush, and a little water. Number two, and I just use this old copy paper, but if you want to use better paper, I use this Stonehenge sometimes. That's a good, I think it's good for watercolor, or you can use that Fabriano or Arches. I'd say start off with just doing tons. You got to do 100 paintings before you start getting good, they say. That's what I've heard. But I've done, you know, you can do 100, then you start getting good. So you might want to do, for your first 100, use this regular old copy paper, okay? Then you'll start getting good. So number one, get the copy paper, draw out a picture. It can just be as simple as my little birds made out of shapes with stars, just that. And start thinking about where you want it white, where you want it dark. Splash on some paint, but don't get any on the area you want it to be white, because you leave the white of the paper, okay? So don't get any paint on those parts. Then go back into it, and around the outside of your forms, start doing those real dark and real opaque. And try that, see how it works for you. Then if you want to add some decorative stuff, I use little dots on it sometimes, and I even use these little hatching marks. So there's a lot to that. But before you do any of that, try to do a little value scale. That's going to build up some skill for you. You know, you get a feeling too for how certain paint colors look, dark and light, you know. So do 3 or 4 of those for different colors. Okay, so number one, get your paint set, brush, and water. Number two, get your copy paper, draw out one of these simple drawings. Then go around the outside, splash some paint on there, leave the white of the paper for the white areas. Just splash it on lightly, transparent. Then go back in around the forms and start darkening in carefully by your choice. That's the creative part of it, right? You're going to decide, darkening it in, make sure it's very opaque around the outside of those forms. That's a good exercise to get you started on it, because you might not want to start right in with a flower painting or a traditional watercolor subject, because it might be more frustrating. Your results with a simple subject like this are more likely to be satisfactory, and it's going to give you a chance to practice your negative space painting the space around it. It's going to give you a chance to get a feel for water paint ratio, transparent and opaque. Okay, and then don't forget to do a few of these also. Okay, hope that helps you a lot, and I'm going to do more on watercolor for sure, because I kind of like watercolor. I don't spend enough time doing it personally. I'd like to, but yeah, I end up not having time to do it. But gosh, I really like watercolor. It's got so much creative potential. Anyway, art to look up: Winslow Homer watercolor, John Singer Sargent watercolor, British landscape watercolors, and Charles Reed. Just Google that name and you'll see his too. You take care now. Have fun with it.